Okay, so let's talk about some right hand technique now in regards to slide guitar. So we talked about the left hand and where all that should be. If you haven't watched that video, make sure you watch that because each part of this is very integral and you're not going to get the sound that you're going for unless you understand each one of these concepts just to the core. You've got to really understand them and then start practicing them. Okay, so make sure you watch that left hand technique, and then now let's talk about right hand or picking hand technique. Now, in regards to playing slide, you can use your fingers, you can finger pick, or you can use a pick. I've seen great players do both, so there's not a right way. I know everybody wants to know the way. There's not a perfect way. There's just your way. I've seen some great players pick with just one finger. I've seen other people do more of like a finger style like this where they're muting. And then I've seen folks use a pick. Lately I've been doing more of a pick type technique just because I'm trying to get more volume out of my slide playing. Before that I used more of a finger picking style. And I'll show you some of the advantages to doing both. But the idea when we're using our right hand when playing slide guitar is there's a lot of muting that goes on. A lot more muting than goes on in standard guitar playing. And here's why. Because slide guitar is more of a linear type of playing as opposed to polyphonically or many voices, many notes at once. Slide guitar is typically monophonic or one voice at a time, where we're playing one note at a time and it's typically moving up on one string and or popping over to another string every now and then. Because of that, we need to have all the other notes muted. Okay, when we're playing standard chords, we can have all these strings ringing out and it's going to sound fine. Not so when it comes to slide guitar. So we're going to be doing a lot of muting. So that's why a lot of folks will do finger picking, because it seems to be a little bit easier to just rest your fingers on the strings like this, and then when you want to hear something, and then I can immediately put my finger down on the string that I don't want to sound anymore. That's the idea of this, okay? So one way that you could do this is to use the standard finger picking technique that you may or may not have come across yet in the course. If not, you can look at the finger picking exercise. But basically it goes like this. The third, second, and first finger takes strings 1, 2, and 3, and then the thumb takes care of string 4, 5, and 6. And so those fingers will stay in those specific positions, and then when you need to pluck that string, you use that specific finger. When you need to play the second string, you use the second finger, and the third finger would play the first string, that sort of thing. So this way, you're always muting and always being able to play a specific note or notes at the same time. Okay, so if I'm, say, playing this lick, I might move this as well. So I just told you to stay there all the time. Technically, you can do that, but you can also move this around a little bit as you need it. So first, second, and third. Again, there's no perfect technique. These are just techniques that you'll find different players using, and here's why they work. Okay, so for instance, if I wanted to play this lick here, I've got all these other strings muted. My thumb is muting strings 3, 4, 5, 6, and my second finger is muting string 1. So I have no worry about another string singing out. If I didn't do that, I might get this sound. Now remember, I'm still muting here. I'm using that technique, but I might get this sound. And so, not quite as clean. You can hear those other strings in there just a little bit. We want a nice clean technique. Also, where this will be even more important is when we start playing in between two strings. So for instance, let's say I'm doing this lick, this, let's say, if I wasn't muting each time I play a note here, then it might sound something like this. And that doesn't sound good at all because we've got notes bleeding into each other. So this is the next part of this technique is really honing down and making sure that you are muting any note that is not actually being played. Okay? You can get into mixing some notes later on, but 99% of the time you're not going to want that. It's really important to be able to kill the note that you're not playing, to be able to mute the string that you are not physically playing at the time. Okay? So now let's talk about this technique from a traditional picking standpoint. So this can be a little bit more tricky because we don't have all these fingers to work with to lay all over the strings. So we have to get a little bit more handsy with our thumb, and you could also use, say, like second, third, or fourth finger to mute this higher string. So if I was doing this technique, that same technique, I might do something like okay, and what I'm doing here is when I hit this note up here, I'm letting the side of my thumb graze this other note. And so it's immediately muting the note that I had just picked. Here's note 1. And when second I hit note 2, my thumb is actually muting the string that just played note 1. Okay? And so then we don't have that bleed sound that we didn't like before. Okay? So the name of the game here is muting strings. However you end up doing it is going to be the way that's right for you. If you like to use a pick, that's the other reason that I like to use a pick, is that most songs that I'm playing, either in a live situation or in the studio, but typically live for me, is they're songs where I'm picking a lot. So I don't want to be constantly putting the pick in my mouth or putting it on my knee or doing whatever I need to do with it, tucking it in my hand here. So I am used to using either just the pick, or you could even do kind of like a hybrid pick, like using fingers 2 and 3. You could do that as well. If you're really wanting to get into slide and the finger picking thing works for you, then you can also just pick with your finger pick, your fingernails for the rest of the song. Okay, so with all that being said, muting is the key here. Let's look into some actual technique lessons that will help hone this idea and bring it home.